In an incident that has triggered widespread shock, the mass abduction at St. Mary's School in Papiri, Niger State, is concerning, as armed men infiltrated the compound before dawn and seized hundreds of children and staff. Initial numbers were uncertain, but after verification exercises, local authorities confirmed 303 students and 12 staff members were missing, 315 in total, making it one of the largest mass kidnappings in Nigeria's modern history, exceeding even the Chibok abductions of 2014. For families, the scale of the tragedy defied comprehension. Survivors spoke of children scattering in panic, some fleeing into surrounding villages while others were forced into the forest. A father who managed to locate his two daughters described the entire community as frozen in fear. Domestic and international observers quickly noted that the event's timing, occurring while Washington intensified its rhetoric, was likely to deepen U.S. scrutiny of Nigeria's internal security crisis. There is a growing belief in Washington that the United States must respond more forcefully to the rising insecurity faced by Christian communities in Nigeria, a country long regarded as a critical partner in West Africa. This sentiment sharpened when senior U.S. officials informed Congress that the Trump administration was developing a strategy to pressure the Nigerian government into improving protections for Christians and strengthening religious freedom. The discussion included diplomatic measures, sanctions, and possibly expanded Pentagon involvement in counterterrorism cooperation. This shift came just as Nigeria was placed once again on the US list of countries of particular concern for alleged religious freedom violations, an assessment Abuja dismissed as simplistic given the country's sprawling and complex security environment. But if Washington's pressure campaign was brewing in the background, events inside Nigeria were about to push the crisis onto the world stage with far greater urgency. This kidnapping was only the latest in a swelling tide of abductions by armed groups commonly referred to as bandits, who have turned kidnapping into a lucrative criminal enterprise. Despite federal laws banning ransom payments, the prohibition has been largely symbolic, as families and local leaders remain under immense pressure to negotiate privately for the safety of captives. The Papiri abduction was the third major attack on students in a single week, coming days after more than 20 schoolgirls were taken in Kebbi and nearly 40 worshippers were abducted from a church in Kwara, where 2 people were killed. Authorities later revealed that St. Mary's School had been instructed to close its boarding section due to intelligence warnings of an impending attack, but the directive was reportedly ignored. Analysts argued that this failure highlighted how weak coordination between local institutions and federal agencies continues to leave vulnerable communities exposed. As security forces launched search operations through the forests of Niger State, families pieced together fragments of information from survivors. Witnesses described the kidnappers as well organized and familiar with escape routes that stretch across state lines. Experts noted that many such gangs evolved from groups of armed herders who took up weapons after violent clashes with farming communities, allowing long-standing disputes over land and water to morph into a decentralized ecosystem of armed criminality. Yet the Papiri incident also intensified international debates about the root causes of violence in Nigeria. In Washington, political figures and advocacy groups argued that Christians were facing targeted persecution, whereas Nigerian officials stressed that extremist groups such as Boko Haram and ISWAP have historically killed more Muslims than Christians due to operating mainly in Muslim-majority regions. In the central states, meanwhile, analysts attribute much of the violence to competition over land and resources, not religious ideology. Amid this complex backdrop, the Trump administration's security posture toward Nigeria hardened. US lawmakers insisted that the Nigerian government was failing to protect Christian communities and demanded stronger action from Washington. President Trump himself went as far as warning that American forces could intervene directly unless Nigeria stopped what he described as targeted killings. US diplomats briefed Congress that sanctions were under review alongside a deeper assessment of how American-supplied military resources were being utilized by Nigerian forces. The Pentagon also signaled that any expansion of counterterrorism collaboration would be conditional on Nigeria demonstrating measurable improvements in protecting vulnerable communities. Nigerian officials, however, countered that the portrayal of a one-sided campaign against Christians reflected external political narratives rather than realities on the ground. Nigeria reacted by accelerating diplomatic engagement. President Bola Tinubu cancelled several scheduled foreign trips, including visits to the G20 summit in South Africa and an AU-EU meeting in Angola, to oversee security responses. More than 40 schools were ordered to close temporarily in high-risk regions. At the same time, a high-level Nigerian delegation, including the National Security Advisor, Defense Chief, Defense Intelligence Head, and Inspector General of Police, traveled to Washington for discussions with senior U.S. officials. Meetings were arranged with the U.S. Defense Secretary, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Deputy Secretary of State. Nigerian officials aimed to reassure Washington that the government was committed to protecting all citizens, regardless of faith, while cautioning that punitive U.S. measures could destabilize ongoing operations against insurgents and armed groups. American officials nonetheless maintained that their assessment was grounded not only in media coverage, but in intelligence reports, diplomatic observations, and monitoring by human rights organizations. Members of the State Department argued that while Nigeria had taken certain steps, the scale of violence facing Christian communities warranted deeper reforms and more visible progress. Congressional pressure continued to build, with lawmakers on both sides raising questions about whether Nigerian security institutions were effectively using the billions in assistance they have received over the years. Critics of the U.S. approach warned that framing Nigeria's conflict primarily as religious could lead to misguided policy decisions, while others argued that ignoring the vulnerability of certain communities would amount to negligence. Meanwhile, the domestic security situation inside Nigeria showed no signs of slowing. Criminal kidnapping networks continued targeting churches, schools, travelers, and rural communities, often demanding ransoms that far exceeded average household income. The attack in Kwara, where abductors demanded the equivalent of tens of thousands of pounds per hostage, exemplified how financial incentives rather than religious identity often dictate targets. ISWAP further complicated matters by releasing footage of an executed Nigerian general, alongside hacked military communications indicating an unsuccessful rescue attempt. Such incidents fueled public frustration, with parents and civil society groups insisting that Nigeria needed more robust intelligence sharing, improved rural policing, and long-term socio-economic investments to address the root causes of insecurity. Taken together, the Papiri abduction and the escalating US-Nigeria tensions reveal a moment of profound uncertainty. Nigeria is confronting one of the largest child kidnappings in its history. At the same time, Washington is weighing sanctions and reconsidering its security partnership with Abuja. For the United States, the issue ties into broader commitments to global religious freedom. For Nigeria, the situation reflects a multi-front struggle against insurgents, resource conflicts, organized crime, and a fraying security apparatus. The risk now lies in misperception. A US policy intended to protect Christian communities could unintentionally deepen social divisions in Nigeria, while Nigeria's assurances will only carry weight if translated into measurable improvement on the ground. As both nations move through this delicate phase of diplomacy, the implications extend far beyond political rhetoric. They will shape military cooperation, civilian safety, and the future trajectory of West Africa's most important security crisis.